Mecca, Saudi Arabia. The sun scorched the white floor of the sacred esplanade, where thousands circled the Kaaba in reverent silence. Among the pilgrims, a foreigner raised his phone, a mocking smile cutting through the air. "All this, just to walk in circles?" he said aloud. The crowd ignored him, but an old woman, wrapped in a blue veil, whispered without lifting her gaze, "Those who mock the ones who pray awaken the wind of the Almighty." A few seconds later, the sky began to stir, and no one in Mecca would forget what followed. Because sometimes Allah doesn't answer with words, He answers with the wind. Before continuing, make sure you're subscribed and comment which city you're watching from. The tourist's name was Ethan Collins, 34 years old, born in Boston, United States. He had arrived in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, with a special visa granted only to journalists, claiming he wanted to document the world's largest pilgrimage. But his channel had another focus: ironic videos, edited clips, and sarcastic commentary about other people's faith. That afternoon, the sound of the adhan echoed through the minarets, and Ethan, wearing sunglasses and a red t-shirt, filmed the faithful as if watching a curious show. "They cry over a stone building makes no sense," he whispered into the mic clipped to his shirt. The camera lens reflected the golden light of the Kaaba, but his eyes saw only viral content. Nearby, an elderly Sudanese pilgrim with a white beard and calm eyes observed quietly. "Son," he said to the man beside him, "those who film with arrogance sometimes record their own warning." Ethan kept walking, distracted, ignoring the soft wind that had begun to sweep across the courtyard, as if the air itself already knew him. The sun was setting over Mecca, turning the marble of the esplanade into gold. The heat of noon had faded, replaced by a sacred breeze scented with incense and warm sand. The call to Asr prayer drifted gently among the arches as the crowd arranged itself for worship. Ethan walked against the flow, the camera hung around his neck, his eyes fixed on the screen, hunting for images that could go viral. To him there was no reverence, only good footage. The sound of the prayers seemed to irritate him. So dramatic. "They cry over a stone cube," he muttered, recording his own voice. A Saudi security guard, calm-faced, stopped him politely. "Sir, please, put the phone away. It's time for prayer." Ethan raised his chin, forcing a smirk. "Relax. I'm just filming. I'm a journalist." The mix of arrogance and impatience rang too loudly in the quiet courtyard. Some of the faithful turned their faces discreetly. The guard stepped back slightly and said firmly, "This is the heart of faith. You don't film it like a park." But Ethan had already walked off, pushing the camera forward, chasing the best shot. A few meters ahead, a Moroccan woman praying toward the Kaaba warned him in Arabic, "Ihtaram al-makan, show respect for this place." He stopped, looked her up and down, and laughed with contempt. "Allah won't be offended by a video, will he?" The laugh echoed, short and sharp, joined by two Western tourists who followed him. One looked uneasy, the other kept filming, amused. But the air had changed. The breeze that once brushed gently against the pilgrims' robes began to blow harder, lifting fine dust between the white mosaics. The sound of paper pages marking Quranic verses scattered like dry rain. The old Sudanese man, still watching, lifted his gaze toward the horizon. The sunlight looked different, too yellow, almost metallic. He closed his eyes and whispered an old supplication, "Rabbi, la tu'akidna, do not punish us for the mistakes of the ignorant." Ethan, distracted, stumbled as he neared the security barrier that divided the courtyard from the holiest area. A thunderclap cracked, sudden and dry, though the sky was clear. The pigeons resting on the minarets took flight all at once, forming a restless white circle above. The breeze turned into a gust. The pilgrims' robes swelled, veils waved like water. The prayers grew louder, though no one raised their voice. Ethan looked around, uneasy. "What's happening?" he muttered, struggling to keep his balance. The old Sudanese man approached slowly, leaning on his cane. His eyes reflected the Kaaba's glow. "This is how the signs begin, son," he said calmly, silent, yet clear to those who still listen. Then the wind blew again, this time only around Ethan. The air grew heavy. A moment before, there had been only murmurs and heat. Then a violent gust tore through the Grand Mosque's courtyard, as if something unseen had ripped open the sky. The robes swayed, veils floated, and the sound of prayers seemed to merge with the roar of the wind. Ethan staggered. The camera slipped from his hands, clattering across the marble floor, sliding between the pilgrims' feet. The drone, hovering a few meters above, was caught in the gust and crashed, shattering before the Kaaba. "Oh great, that cost me $1,000, he shouted angrily, but no one answered. The faithful remained in prayer, serene, untouched by the storm. The wind circled only him, a narrow whirlwind, audible, focused, almost personal. Ethan tried to move, but the air pushed him back. His shirt flapped against his body, and his hair rose as if charged with static. The afternoon light turned greyish, a thin haze slowing everything down, making it feel unreal. The sound of the wind began to shift. It wasn't just noise anymore. There was a deep resonance, something between a chant and a distant call. The words weren't clear, but the tone echoed a verse from the prayers around him. A young Indonesian pilgrim kneeling nearby opened his eyes and murmured, "Subhanallah, even the wind is rebuking him." Ethan forced a nervous laugh. "It's just coincidence, just a random gust," he said, though his voice trembled. When he looked at his phone, he saw it had turned on by itself. The camera was recording, though he hadn't touched it. The image wavered, capturing the circular motion of the wind around him. What's it filming?" he whispered, pressing the stop button. The screen flickered. A band of white light streaked across the frame for a split second, too bright to be a reflection. The glow had shape, something humanoid, fleeting, gone in an instant. A group of nearby pilgrims watched in silence, not afraid, only astonished. The old Sudanese man stood motionless, his gaze fixed on Ethan. "It's not the wind around you, son," he said softly. "It's the warning." Ethan stepped back, heart racing. He tried to laugh again, but his throat failed. What came out was a muffled sound, half a sob. The feeling was unmistakable. Something unseen was watching him, something that understood every thought in his mind. Then everything stopped. The wind ceased suddenly, as if someone had shut a giant door. The silence that followed was almost physical, a thick emptiness that made even the sound of breathing echo. For a few seconds no one moved, only the faint sound of sandals on marble and the flapping of a black banner atop the Kaaba broke the stillness. Ethan lifted his phone and looked at the screen one last time. The display showed only swirling dust, but in the background, a white figure moved among the pilgrims. It was enough to make his blood run cold. He lowered the phone and stepped back twice. He didn't know if he was fleeing from the wind or from what it had revealed. The air became still again. No movement, no sound. The gust that had shaken the heart of Mecca vanished so abruptly that even the silence itself seemed to ache in the ears. It was as if the entire city had been suspended by an invisible thread. Ethan stood frozen in the middle of the courtyard, his phone trembling in his hand. The crowd that had once moved in waves of devotion now looked like a living painting. People kneeling, faces damp, eyes lifted to the sky, yet too quiet. Time, for a few seconds, seemed to stop existing. The sunset light fell on the white walls of the Grand Mosque, reflecting shades of copper and gold, but a lone shadow covered only the space around Ethan, a perfect outline, as if an unseen cloud followed him. He looked up. The sky was clear. No trace of a storm, no sign of the wind that had surrounded him moments earlier. He swallowed hard. "This makes no sense," he murmured in English, but even his own voice sounded muffled, as if the air around him had grown dense. Suddenly, a soft sound rose, the gentle clatter of tasbih beads. The old Sudanese man approached, slow and steady, walking with the calm certainty of someone carrying ancient understanding. His white robe swayed lightly, even though there was no wind. "Isson," he said, his accent heavy but his tone serene. "You don't understand what you've seen. Allah speaks in silence, and sometimes the wind is his tongue." Ethan stepped back, his face pale. "Do you think that was punishment? For filming?" The old man smiled, but it was a smile of compassion, not reproach. "No, it's not punishment. It's mercy, because there is still time to hear the warning." For a moment, Ethan said nothing. The Kaaba gleamed with unusual brightness, reflecting the sunset as if it emitted its own light. In the distance, the adhan began to echo, but the sound seemed to come from within, not from the sky, like the whole courtyard was breathing in unison. The old man raised his right hand and pointed upward. "Look, even the air changes when Allah decides to remind a man of the path." Ethan lifted his eyes. Above, a single cloud floated over the courtyard, perfectly still. Its edges shimmered with golden and bluish tones, as if reflecting gentle flames. He blinked, trying to decide if it was real. When he looked back down, he noticed something that made him recoil again. No one else around him seemed to see it. The Sudanese man spoke again, his tone low and steady. You mocked faith, but Allah is not offended, he teaches. Some learn through words, others through the wind. The tourist hesitated, his eyes unfocused. I didn't mean to offend. It was just a video, just curiosity. Curiosity that wounds the sacred doesn't bring knowledge, it brings blindness, the man replied, lowering his gaze. Ethan took a deep breath. His heart pounded too fast. He tried to walk back to the hotel, his steps unsteady. No one stopped him. The people kept praying, but their eyes followed him quietly, as if they sensed something different about his presence. As he passed through the gate, he heard the wind again, faint, distant, coming from above. It seemed to whisper his name in a language he couldn't understand. He looked over his shoulder and saw the old man still there, motionless, the rosary hanging from his hand, his eyes fixed on the sky. Ethan didn't realize that, at that exact moment, the video on his phone was already spreading across the internet. A curious hotel staff member had posted the clip, the foreigner laughing in front of the car bar, followed by the unexplainable gust and the strange light passing through the camera. Within hours, the footage would cross continents, but in that moment, Ethan felt only the echo of silence, a silence that didn't seem human. As he left the sacred courtyard, he heard the old man's final words, spoken firmly, almost prophetic. Those who hear Allah's warning and treat it like mere wind, one day will be carried away by it. The hotel room was steeped in half-darkness. The half-drawn curtain let in the flickering glow of Mecca's streetlights, reflecting on the beige walls and the cold gleam of the laptop. Ethan sat at the edge of the bed, still in his wrinkled clothes, eyes fixed on the screen. His hands trembled slightly, not from cold but from something he couldn't name. He played the video once more. It began with him smiling, making jokes in English, while the crowd circled the Kaaba. The sound of prayers in the background was distant, almost muffled. Then the image shook. The lens caught the rising dust and the microphone cracked with the roar of the wind. Ethan paused it, rewound a few seconds, played it in slow motion. There it was, between two pilgrims dressed in white, a tall, translucent figure moving against the wind. It wasn't a reflection, it wasn't a shadow. The light came from within the figure. When he zoomed in, he could make out the outline of arms, the soft motion of a robe, and for a brief instant, the glimmer of something like eyes. That wasn't there, he muttered, his voice hoarse. The image seemed to look back at him, aware. As the figure dissolved, Ethan saw himself in the footage, falling to his knees, trying to protect the phone. The coincidence made him shiver. A soft knock sounded at the door. The hotel manager, a middle-aged Syrian man, entered carrying a cup of tea. "Mr. Collins, sorry to bother you. There's been a bit of a stir online. Your video is everywhere." Ethan frowned. "My video?" "Yes. Someone uploaded it a few hours ago. They say the wind appeared only over the Kaaba area. City meteorologists have no explanation. No radar detected a storm." The American stayed silent, watching the steam rise from the cup. The distant call to prayer drifted through the window, soft, melodic, and each note seemed to cut through his chest. "Do you believe in signs?" he asked suddenly. The manager smiled, but without irony. "I believe nothing happens without permission. Sometimes Allah speaks to those who don't want to listen, and he uses whatever he must." Ethan looked away, trying to focus on the screen. In the video after the storm, a faint sound could be heard, something like a woman's voice speaking Arabic. He turned the volume up. The app's auto-translation failed, but he recognized a phrase he'd heard that day. "Those who laugh at faith invite the wind of Allah." The same voice as the old woman who had warned him before it all happened. A chill ran down his spine. By reflex, he opened the browser and typed in English. "Mecca wind incident today, Kaaba." The results were countless. Videos, screenshots, translations, discussions in religious forums, and even international headlines. American tourist witnesses unexplained phenomenon in Mecca. Isolated gust hits the sacred esplanade, an unprecedented event. The comments were even more intense. A clear sign from Allah, a warning for the arrogant. The wind of mercy is also the wind of correction. Ethan ran his hands over his face, trying to ease the weight pressing on his chest. He replayed the video again, this time with headphones. At the exact moment the wind appeared, there was a deep sound, almost like a heartbeat. It wasn't distortion, it was rhythmic, constant, echoing beneath the audio. He lowered the volume, but the sound seemed to continue inside his head. The manager watched silently. "Mr. Collins," he finally said, They say the wind spun in circles, but it didn't touch anyone except you. Maybe you should see the imam. He might help you understand." Ethan shook his head, clinging to logic. "I'm a journalist, not a believer. There must be a physical explanation." "Then find it," the Syrian replied calmly, "but find it quickly. Signs don't wait for understanding." When the man left, silence returned. Ethan increased the screen brightness and froze the video on a specific frame, the moment the figure of light passed in front of the camera. Behind it, the wind formed a perfect spiral, like writing drawn in the air. He couldn't read Arabic, but the shape seemed to form 3 letters: Alif, Lam, Ha, the initials of Allah's name. The American leaned back in his chair, his eyes welling up without knowing why. His heart pounded fast and heavy, and the air in the room felt thinner. He turned off the light, leaned against the wall, and left the laptop on the table. On the screen, the video kept looping, and every time the figure crossed the frame, a faint breeze slipped through the closed window. Dawn in Mecca broke differently. The sky, usually golden, appeared greyish, and a steady breeze blew since before Fajr, as if the city still remembered what had happened the day before. In the hotel corridors, voices whispered. With each new notification on Ethan's phone, panic grew. His face, frozen in the exact moment the wind brought him to his knees, was on every screen. TV channels, online newspapers, and religious accounts from across the world shared the video with captions in Arabic, English, and Indonesian. The most common title read, "The Wind That Spoke, a Sign from Allah in Mecca." Some believed it was a miracle, others a punishment. No meteorologist, theologian, or cameraman could explain the isolated gust, the perfect whirlwind, or the strange luminosity captured on film. There was something impossible in it, and the whole world seemed to stop to discuss it. Ethan, locked in his room, read the comments with his heart racing. The wind only touched the arrogant. Allah called him to repentance. Even atheists bow before the sacred. His throat went dry. The shame was physical. Every word hurt as if the wind were blowing again inside his chest. Unable to bear the confinement, he put on a white thorb borrowed from the hotel, covered his face with a scarf, and stepped into the damp early morning streets. He walked aimlessly, trying to avoid stares, but people recognized him anyway. "That's him, the man from the video," whispered a tea vendor. A group of young pilgrims approached, not in anger, but in curiosity. "Were you afraid when the wind came?" one asked, in hesitant Arabic. Ethan didn't answer. He just lowered his gaze and walked faster. Every corner seemed to echo. The sound of the morning adhan flowed through the minarets, and every Allahu Akbar seemed to whisper his name. Those who saw him stepped aside quietly, not out of disdain, but out of reverence. Turning down a narrow alley, he stopped before a small date stall. The sweet scent reminded him of the market where he had mocked the faithful. Behind the counter, seated on a wooden stool, was the old Sudanese man. The same calm eyes, the same rosary between his fingers. The old man looked at him for a few seconds before speaking. "I didn't expect to see you so soon, son." Ethan swallowed hard. "I needed to understand. It's everywhere. They say it was a sign." The man nodded gently. "It was, but not as you think. It wasn't to shame you. It was to awaken you." The wind blew again, this time softly, stirring the shop banners around them. Ethan fixed his eyes on the dates on the table and whispered, "Did Allah punish me?" The old man shook his head. "Allah doesn't punish with wind. He corrects. Punishment would be silence, and you were still remembered." The words hung in the air, lighter than the dust dancing between them. Ethan drew a deep breath. "I didn't understand anything I saw. That light, that sound." The old man smiled. "What your eyes captured is what your heart denied. Faith can't be filmed. It finds you." A group of pilgrims passed by, greeting the Sudanese man respectfully. He returned the salam and continued, "Son, sometimes Allah chooses the unbeliever to show the power of the unseen, not to humiliate him, but to turn mockery into prayer." Ethan looked up, his eyes glistening. "But was it real? Did it truly happen?" "More real than the air you breathe," the man replied firmly. "And now give thanks, for you were touched by something many pray a lifetime to feel." The tourist remained silent, absorbing every word. The wind blew once more, swirling the dust at their feet into a small circle that faded slowly. The old man pointed toward the horizon, where the sunlight began to wash over the distant Kaaba. "Go back there," he said, "but this time without cameras, only with your heart." Ethan nodded slightly and walked away. With each step, The sound of the prayers grew clearer, more intimate. For the first time since arriving in Arabia, he wasn't filming anything, and yet he felt he was truly seeing everything for the first time. Night draped Mecca in a silvery glow. The streets, once filled with voices and footsteps, were now wrapped in reverent silence. The distant call to prayer echoed between the minarets, drawing restless hearts back to peace. Ethan walked slowly, weighed down by thoughts heavier than the desert heat. Shame pressed on him like stone. Every glance he met during the day seemed to repeat the same verdict. It's him. Even the wind, when it passed, seemed to whisper his guilt. For hours, he thought about leaving, deleting everything, changing hotels, pretending none of it had happened. But something inside him, something new, almost alive, held him back. An unexplainable pull guided him back to the Grand Mosque. The courtyard was bathed in golden light, the marble reflecting the stars. Hundreds of pilgrims still circled the Kaaba, their steps forming the most constant, hypnotic sound in the world. Ethan entered quietly, keeping his head low, his heart racing. The memory hit like a blade. Right there, in that very spot, he had laughed at the faith of thousands. Now, every detail seemed sacred. The scent of incense, the murmur of prayers, the moonlight shimmering on the black cloth of the Kaaba. He kept his phone in his pocket. No camera, no lens between him and what was before him. He knelt on the cold floor. His body trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. He closed his eyes, and the words came out in trembling whispers. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is sufficient for us, and He is the best protector. Tears flowed freely, and he didn't try to stop them. It was a different kind of crying, silent, pure, as if something long buried within him were finally being washed clean. The wind returned, not in fury, but with gentleness. It drifted through the arches, brushed against the pilgrim's robes, and touched his face with an almost human softness. The air seemed to wrap around him like an invisible embrace. The sound of prayers rose all around. A child recited verses from the Quran beside his father. A group of men lifted their hands, asking for forgiveness. Everything vibrated in harmony, and Ethan among them felt his heart beat in rhythm with their supplications. An Egyptian pilgrim sitting beside him noticed the foreigner crying. He touched his shoulder gently. Allah forgives those who bow with sincerity, he said, his accent thick, but his tone filled with certainty. Ethan looked up, surprised by the words that seemed to answer his very thoughts. He tried to speak, but no words came out. He only nodded, eyes glistening. He stayed there on his knees for a long time. Time ceased to exist. The courtyard turned around the Kaaba, and for the first time, he felt himself turning with it, not as an observer, but as part of it. The wind strengthened for a few seconds, though still softly. The pilgrims' garments lifted lightly, and women's veils moved like waves. It felt like a silent response, a confirmation. In that moment, Ethan understood something no camera could ever capture. It wasn't punishment, it was invitation. The wind that had once knocked him down now held him up. The same force that had humiliated him before the world was now lifting him before the divine. The minaret's bells vibrated, announcing the next call to prayer. Everyone rose at once, moving like a sea obeying an unseen command. Ethan remained on his knees, watching in reverence. The Egyptian helped him to his feet. "Come, brother, pray with us," he said, extending his hand. Ethan accepted. He stood among the pilgrims, aligned as one of them. When the imam began the recitation, the foreigner simply closed his eyes, letting each word pass through him like a gentle breeze. At that moment, without understanding the language, he felt the meaning. His pride had been broken, and in the space left behind, something new was born. Faith. The wind blew one last time, brushing past everyone and rising toward the sky. Ethan took a deep breath, his face wet with tears, and whispered in English, barely audibly, "Thank you." The pilgrim beside him, not understanding the phrase, simply smiled and replied with a single word that seemed to hold everything, "Amin." The prayer unfolded in perfect harmony. Thousands of voices recited the same verse, the same rhythm, the same breath. The collective vibration seemed to fill every stone of the Grand Mosque. Ethan was among them, head bowed, hands resting on his knees, eyes damp, heart light, and for the first time, at peace. But then, something changed. The speakers that carried the Adhan and the Quranic verses trembled, and for a brief instant, everything stopped. The sound vanished. No breath, no wind. The entire city fell into a silence so complete, it felt impossible. A deep roar split the air from above. It wasn't thunder. There were no clouds. Yet the sky seemed to open. The pilgrims lifted their faces all at once, as if obeying an unseen command. The flags on the minarets began to move in opposite directions, the fabric stretched by unpredictable currents of air. And from the horizon came a white light, solid, alive, not like lightning but like something that breathed. It descended slowly, crossing the veil of night, reflecting on the marble surfaces and in the tears of those who watched. A murmur spread through the crowd. Subhanallah. Ethan stood still, unable to blink. The brightness enveloped the courtyard, and in the center of the Kaaba, the air began to swirl, first softly, then with steady force, as if an invisible presence were shaping the wind into a perfect circle. The sound it produced wasn't that of a storm. It was like a deep chant, a resonant tone that vibrated in everyone's chest. The people stepped back, instinctively creating space. But the circle didn't touch anyone, only him. Ethan stood at its center. The wind spun around his body without moving a single fold of the other's clothes. It was as if the air recognized him, as if it surrounded him to return him to the place from which his faith had fled. A pilgrim raised his phone and began recording. Others did the same. Within minutes, dozens of cameras captured the phenomenon, but none could reproduce the exact glow that human eyes saw. Ethan wept. The tears streamed freely, and he made no effort to hide them. The sound of the wind surrounded him like a voice, a language his body understood even without words. He felt pressure in his chest, not of pain, but of surrender. He knelt. His forehead touched the cold floor. At that instant, the whirlwind of air stopped spinning and rose, climbing in a spiral until it disappeared into the sky. A beam of light crossed the mosque's dome and, for a fleeting second, illuminated his face, a glow that pulsed like the beat of a heart. No one dared to speak. The imam halted his recitation and watched in silence. The wind ceased. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then a final breeze swept across the courtyard, light, almost tender, as if whispering, "Enough." Ethan stood up slowly. His body trembled, but his gaze was steady. Around him, hundreds still watched, some in tears, others in awe. A man from Pakistan whispered, his voice trembling with emotion, "Allah purified him with the same wind that corrected him." The foreigner didn't answer. He only lifted his eyes to the sky, the same sky that moments earlier had seemed ready to swallow him, and murmured in a tone only the wind could hear, "Forgive me." The people resumed their prayers. Life returned to rhythm, but the air remained changed, heavier, fuller, alive. That night, Mecca understood what no scholar could ever explain. Even the wind has a soul when Allah chooses to teach. The following dawn brought Mecca an air of wonder and reverence. The video recorded by the pilgrims had crossed borders within hours, translated into dozens of languages and broadcast on news networks, blogs, and religious pages worldwide. The headline was always the same: "The wind that forgave the arrogant." The comments multiplied. Some wept while watching, others questioned, but most said the same: "Allah shows signs even to those who don't believe. The wind has eyes when it is sent by the Almighty." Ethan read some of the messages before turning off his phone. They unsettled him deeply, not because of fame, but because of guilt. He knew that the miracle everyone admired was, in truth, the reflection of his own shame consuming him. He left the hotel before sunrise. The damp streets smelled of dust and incense. He walked aimlessly until he saw the small market where he had last seen the old Sudanese man. The elder was there, sitting in the same wooden chair, the rosary between his fingers, watching the calm movement of the first pilgrims of the day. Ethan stopped before him, removed the scarf from his face, and before words could even form meaning, he fell to the ground. "Teach me how to ask for forgiveness." The old man took a deep breath. The foreigner's gesture drew the attention of a few passers-by, but no one dared to intervene. The man simply leaned forward, placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, and helped him up. "Don't ask me for forgiveness," he said, his voice firm yet compassionate. "Ask the one who allowed you to feel fear, so that your pride would sleep and your soul would awaken." Ethan looked at him, tears brimming. "And if I still don't know how to speak to him, then stay silent. Allah understands what the heart tries to say." The words echoed deeper than any sermon. In the following days, Ethan never touched a camera again. The phone, once his inseparable companion, lay forgotten in his hotel room. He began going to the mosque daily, not to record, but to help. He started by gathering sandals left outside, then began offering water to elderly pilgrims under the burning sun. He carried heavy bottles with trembling hands but a serene face. Those who had seen him mock faith recognized him. Some approached out of curiosity, others observed from afar, trying to understand if what they saw was genuine. But Ethan sought no audience. He simply did what felt right, to serve. In little time, the mosque guards knew him by name. "The American of the Wind," they said with respect. He learned to guide lost pilgrims, translate signs, and offer shade to those fainting from exhaustion. And with every act, the weight inside him seemed to lessen. One morning, the old Sudanese man found him again, kneeling to help a child tie his sandals. "Now you understand, son," he said with a gentle smile. "Forgiveness isn't asked for with words, but with actions." Ethan looked up. "And how will I know I've been forgiven?" The old man answered slowly. "When the wind blows over you, and you no longer feel fear." At that moment, a breeze crossed the courtyard, lifting the golden dust from the ground and stirring the black cloth of the Kaaba. Ethan closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt the air touch his face. Soft, warm, familiar. It wasn't punishment. It was response. Time moved naturally, and the foreigner's presence no longer drew surprise. Quietly, Ethan remained in Mecca. His tourist visa expired, but he asked for permission to stay, not as a reporter, but as a student. He moved into a small room near the Grand Mosque, simple with pale walls and a window facing the call of the Adhan. The days once filled with filming and scripts became hours of silence. He learned Arabic from a young Egyptian student who also taught him to pronounce the verses. He spent mornings reading translations of the Quran, lingering over the verses about repentance and mercy. The travel channel, once the symbol of his vanity, vanished. Without warning, Ethan deleted it. In its place, another appeared. No soundtracks, no dramatic cuts, only quiet reflections recorded, with his phone resting on a stone. In one of the videos, he said softly, his accent heavy, "I laughed at devotion, and Allah answered me with wind. Now I understand it wasn't punishment, it was invitation." The video didn't go viral, and that brought him peace. Now he spoke not to crowds, but to those who needed to hear. Locals began recognizing him on the streets. They called him Ethan al-Talib, the student. Some laughed, others greeted him respectfully. Children followed him, asking him to tell the story of the wind, and he would only reply, "The wind speaks, but only those whose hearts allow it can listen." In the afternoons, it was common to see him sitting in the mosque's side courtyard, rosary between his fingers, watching the sunset behind the minarets. The wind blew gently through his hair, and he always smiled, that serene smile of someone who no longer needs to prove anything to the world. Arrogance had dissolved into the same air that once brought him to his knees. Now every breath was remembrance and gratitude. Those who passed by said he seemed part of the scenery, a pilgrim among many, a man who had learned that true return isn't to where you came from, but to the point where your soul finally understands why the wind blows. Time passed quietly over Mecca's old streets. The old Sudanese man, who had been a guide and mirror for so many, fell ill peacefully and passed away one calm morning, surrounded by prayers. The mosque courtyard filled with pilgrims. Among them, Ethan stood holding the elder's rosary, the same one he had so often seen glide through his fingers. The cold beads seemed to pulse with the memory of the words the man had left him. During the farewell, the sound of the wind returned, sweeping through the arches of the Grand Mosque. The air changed in texture, light, fragrant, almost golden. Some pilgrims smelled jasmine, others swore they heard a distant voice whispering, "The mercy of Allah is the wind that never ceases." Ethan lifted his gaze, silent tears running down his face. The sun reflected on the golden dome, and for a brief moment, the same wind that had once struck him now caressed his face in farewell. "Subhanallah," he murmured, "may I never forget the sound of forgiveness." The adhan began to echo, announcing the next prayer. The crowd moved toward the Kaaba, and Ethan followed, the rosary firm in his hands, feeling that this was the purest sound in the world, the sound of a soul at peace. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and watch the next video. Because there are moments when words fall silent, and it's the wind itself that continues telling what Allah wants the heart to learn.